name reading or you watch the whole thing, it's so emotional because it's so clear that certainly for the immediate families of the victims,
Absolutely.
The pain scars over, but it doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you about that day that had happened. Where were you, and then what did your role become that day?
You know, it's like a lot of people. It's a cliche. You know, I know exactly what I was doing, and you all remember it when you get into that situation. I remember very clearly. I was almost at my gym to take a spin class, and a couple minutes after the first plane crashed into the towers, I got a call from my producer saying the news director wants you in here to. It looked like a long morning. We don't really know what kind of plane it was or what happened, but we want you in here. And so I said okay, and I ran back home and got showered, and I turned on the television really loudly, and the anchor at the time, who shall remain unidentified, when the second plane hit the tower, I'm listening to it in the shower, and he says, well, clearly we have a communication problem with the aviation tower and the control tower. And I remember taking the bar of soap, throwing it against the wall and saying, bleep, what are you saying? We are under attack. And I got out of the shower with shampoo in my hair, dried off, rushed to the office, and got on the anchor desk and stayed there. We were at work till, a couple hours before sunrise the next day.
Wow, yeah. How difficult was it for you to deliver news like that to your audience?
Until 9/11, 2001, people would say, what's the hardest story you ever covered and everything else, and the biggest, and it was always kind of tough. I covered O.J. Simpson for 14 months and for Good Morning America, and all sorts of big stories. But after that, nothing could compare it to what we did on 9/11. I think that living in this city in New York, and knowing that we all sort of knew someone who was related to somebody, or knew that person, or knew someone who knew that person. We were all connected to the people inside those buildings, and it was very difficult. Peter Jennings at the time said, maybe you go home and just hug your kids. And I think I really wanted to do that, and I didn't see him for a couple days because our schedules were a little mixed up. I went right back to work after sunrise, and it's one of those things where you cannot break down, but you also want to reflect the feelings of the audience, which was anger and hurt and confusion and fear at what had been created at the World Trade Center, and how our lives would not be the same going forward, and how the world would change. And as we know, it really did.
Absolutely. Just a couple more questions. How difficult was it to get information that day?
Well, it was pretty darn difficult. We had troops on the ground, and cell phone towers were gone. The towers on top of the World Trade Center were the towers for television stations and communications devices and everything else, and networks. We had just switched to a Nextel system, which we had direct communication, and so it was. Hold on for 1 second.
Sure.
Go really. I'm sorry. Let me start that again. Okay. Appreciate it. Let me start that again.
That's okay.
I'm not showing the school. Just me. Right. I'm in front of a private school, and the very alert security guard said, "What are you doing here?"
Oh, okay.
You can't tell where I am, right?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Where were we? I'm sorry.
Just getting information that day, was it difficult?
It was difficult because people didn't know. People didn't know what happened. They didn't know that, there were all those hijackers with 4 planes. We knew that obviously 4 planes, not by coincidence, crashed into the United States properties. But we didn't know who they were, and we didn't know what they were trying to do. We didn't know what Al-Qaeda was like that as we came to know it. We done some reports on it. One of the people at ABC News had, John Miller, who had actually interviewed bin Laden in one of his mountain hideaways. So we knew a little bit about it, but the masses didn't know about it. And to get information about who was alive, I remember we had reporters at the scene. There were thousands of flyers put out everywhere saying, have you seen fill in the name? And, please have him or her call me. And it was just desperation time for those people. Plus, the smoke was everywhere in the city. You could see it everywhere. You could smell it. It was acrid. It was toxic. And the closer you got, the more dangerous it was, as we are seeing now with all these first responders and people who live in that area, very sick with 9/11 related illnesses. And it was just a very difficult thing as reporters. It was difficult to be there and get information. But we had reporters on the ground, and we got people stories. And for the first 18 hours and 24 hours, it was all about the people and the information about who did it, why, and what the U.S. response would be. That did come in later. But at first, this was a terrible human tragedy, and that's what we covered.
Absolutely. Final question, Bill. This is the 18th anniversary. How does your coverage change every year?
There is distance, I guess, from time. Time brings distance. But I think that on a basis of the coverage of that day and a memorial, we go right back to where people were feeling that day, what people were feeling. And certainly the victims of the family, they are, they scar over. The pain scars over, but it doesn't disappear. And there's no such thing as closure for them ever. They are still in pain and will be for the rest of their days. I think we have to be aware that there is a whole generation of people on this 18th anniversary who are going to graduate high school during this academic year, and they were not born on 9/11. They were born after 9/11. And except for what they study in school, they may not know a lot about it. So I think we feel with that in mind that it's our job as journalists to carry that banner and the mantra of, hashtag never forget, because this happened to our city and it changed us here in so many ways, logistically and psychologically, everywhere. And I think that in that way, our coverage sort of remains the same. It's not frantic, but it is filled with emotion still.
Yeah. And I'll wrap up with this. What is your one vivid memory of that day?
I think it's hard to not think about those towers crumbling. But if I picture myself with one image besides that, we have two colleagues, Nina Pineda and Lauren Glassberg, fast friends then and now, who were out there covering it, and someone snapped a picture of them hiding with a car as cover as the dust of those crumbled towers poured over them. And there was such fear in these brave young women's eyes and very talented reporters. And I can't get that image out of my head because I know both of them very well and they're friends of mine, and they were so scared, kneeling down behind the car with this dust just pouring over them.
Wow. All right, Bill. Well, thank you so much again for taking the time and stopping on the street there to talk to us.
That's all right. Well, I appreciate it, and good luck with your coverage. It's important, the coverage.
It is. Thank you so much, Bill. Great talking to you.
Thanks, Brett. See you later.
Okay, goodbye.